We spent a lot of time on this show looking forward to the 2010 midterm elections, but right now we want to take a look back to the 2008 Senate race that, as you all know by now, resulted in a recount, a massive recount here in the state of Minnesota. And the author of this book, This Is Not Florida, joins me now to talk a little bit about it. Jay Weiner from MinnPost, formerly of the Star Tribune, has done some great work here in the Twin Cities over the years, and has written a book also about the stadium wars that have gone on here. He's been a guest of ours before, but this recount really was fascinating. Now, like any of these things where it goes on, people get a little bored with it after a while, but this book really captures what happened, and you do a great job of character development in it. And the one, the title, This Is Not Florida, I remember the day sitting in the Supreme Court chambers when Justice Anderson looked at Roger Magnuson, one of the high-paid attorneys for Franken-Coleman, and he just said, "This is not Florida."
Right. That was the moment when the Coleman campaign was attempting for the first time to stop the inclusion of the wrongly rejected absentee ballots. And Roger Magnuson is one of the more sophisticated, bow-tied kind of lawyers here in town. He represented George Bush in Florida before the Florida Senate, and he came into the Supreme Court with his own swagger, and the justices really kind of moved up in their chairs because he's an important guy. Justice Anderson promised himself and his colleagues that he would not say anything for about 5 minutes. If you know Justice Anderson, it's a little hard for him to stop talking for about 37 seconds, and he instantly reacted when Magnuson said, basically, "You're taking us down the path to Florida." And Justice Paul Anderson said, "Counsel, I've been to Florida. This is not Florida," meaning we're not going to have a Bush v. Gore politicized recount.
And the great thing about that becoming the title of the book, and you addressed that whole issue very early on, is that it really foreshadowed what eventually happened. It turned out the problems in Minnesota were far different from Florida, and the result was just the opposite. In Florida, a Republican ended up prevailing. Right. In Minnesota, it was a Democrat.
Well, I think this was, it revealed a couple things. One is, we care here in Minnesota about what other people think about us a lot. People called that we're in in the middle of nowhere, and we're just rubes. In Florida, the recount took 36 days. Ours took 35 weeks. We're into process here, and I think we really cared about how we looked. And so I think that Chief Justice Eric Magnuson, who was the Republican appointed by Tim Pawlenty, he played it straight down the middle, and he didn't side with the Republicans. Mark Ritchie, the Secretary of State, clearly the most left-wing, I think, elected official in the state, he voted most of the time in the canvassing board with the two GOP people there. And then the judges, both in the three-judge panel Supreme Court, most of them appointed by Republicans, independents, they hit it right down the middle, unlike Florida.
And we don't have a lot of time left, but we have some video that we pulled just to remind people of what this recount was all about. If we can take a look at that while we talk about the fact that the one thing the Franken campaign did better than the Coleman campaign was keep track of the count at the table.
Yes.
Here you see people, looking over some of the ballots. They monitored this, and they knew day after day exactly what that count was.
Right. One of their lawyers, Chris Sauter from Washington, D.C., who's done about 25 of these recounts, told Mark Elias, the chief lawyer in the recount, we need to keep track of the recount calls at the table, because the election judges around the state are going to make calls that will probably be upheld by the canvassing board when it gets here. And that's how, if you remember, on December 20, in this big snowstorm, about 4 or 5 days before the canvassing board met, Mark Elias, the Franken lawyer, predicted we're going to win by 35 to 50 votes. The Republicans laughed at him, reporters laughed at him. They won by 49. He was off by 1, and they knew their data.
And you and I often sat side by side at these news conferences, and we'd hear Mark Elias talk about, here's what the number's going to be tomorrow, and we'd all raise our eyebrows and go, how do you know that? And certainly Coleman's attorneys didn't believe it, because they were not keeping the same count.
And I think that was a turning point for a lot of people, particularly the reporters covering it, because we finally believed Elias. His credibility had been shaky because of some earlier things he had said. It also shocked the Franken side that the Coleman people didn't believe them. It made them realize Coleman was not on top of the data, and that data collection came back to haunt Coleman again when the absentee ballots came in.
And again, the book is called This Is Not Florida. I've read most of it. I've not been through all of it. I thought, well, why do I want to reread something I lived through? He does a great job of telling you what went on behind the scenes. It really is a fascinating account.
Great. Well, thanks very much.
This Is Not Florida. It is available in bookstores and online just about anywhere. Jay Weiner,
Great.
Congratulations on the book. Thanks for being here. Still ahead, a behind-the-scenes look from our interview with Governor Pawlenty. He just couldn't resist taking one more shot at me before he goes. We'll be right back.